Imagine walking into a medieval market and seeing vegetables you've never even heard of. Plants so tough they survived wars, plagues, and brutal winters, yet somehow disappeared from our plates. If we don't bring them back, we might lose more than just flavor. We might lose resilience itself. Today we're uncovering 15 forgotten vegetables medieval farmers grew that need to come back. And by the end, you'll see why modern supermarkets feel strangely empty. First, meet scarrot, a sweet, carrot-like root, so prized in Tudor England that even kings demanded it at feasts. It tastes like a mix of parsnip and chestnut, grows in poor soil, and comes back year after year. So why did we replace it with bland, uniform carrots? Then there's Good King Henry, a leafy green once more common than spinach, packed with nutrients and hardy enough to thrive without chemicals. Did convenience quietly erase nutrition? Now picture scorzonera, the black salsify with dark skin and creamy white flesh that tastes like oysters when cooked. Medieval cooks loved it. Today, most people have never seen it. And what about sea kale, harvested along cold European coasts, blanched under clay pots to create tender shoots months before other greens even sprouted? How did we forget a plant that beats the hunger gap of early spring? Here's a twist. Many of these crops weren't abandoned because they failed. They were abandoned because they were too diverse, too irregular, too alive for industrial farming. Take fat hen, a wild ancestor of quinoa, and spinach, once gathered from fields and cooked in stews across medieval villages. Now it's labeled a weed. But what if the weeds are actually the lost superfoods? Then there's krasnas, tiny spiraled tubers like edible pearls, nutty and crisp, grown in monastery gardens. They look strange, and that strangeness pushed them out of modern supply chains obsessed with perfect shapes. Medieval farmers didn't care about appearance. They cared about survival, and survival crops were king. Consider groundnut, a climbing vine with protein-rich tubers used by both European peasants and Native American communities. It fixes nitrogen in the soil. It feeds you. It improves the land. Isn't that the definition of sustainable? Yet we barely cultivate it. Next comes Alexander's, once called wild celery, eaten from root to seed. Romans brought it to Britain. Medieval cooks turned it into broths and remedies. Today, almost forgotten. And then there's rampion, also known as the vegetable, behind the fairy tale Rapunzel, a crunchy root and leafy green combo that filled medieval gardens. We remember the story, but not the food that inspired it. Strange, right? Now imagine a winter without supermarkets. No imports, no refrigerated trucks. Medieval farmers relied on scorzonera, parsnips, turnip-rooted chervil, and Turkish rocket, hardy plants that thrived in frost, and Turkish rocket. Hardy plants that thrived in frost. Turkish rocket tastes like horseradish and mustard, combined, a fiery leaf that wakes up any meal. Why did we trade bold flavors for watery lettuce? Because industry rewards uniformity. Medieval gardens rewarded diversity. Here's another forgotten gem, mashua, grown in colder regions, resistant to pests without chemicals. Or cardoons, cousins of the artichoke, with thick edible stalks, braised in medieval kitchens for rich winter dishes. They take patience, but patience creates flavor. And then there's sea beet, the wild ancestor of modern sugar beet and chard. Before selective breeding stripped it into sweetness factories, it was a hardy coastal green feeding entire communities. Think about that. Our modern crops are narrower versions of once wild abundance. Even the humble salsify, known as the oyster plant, once roasted in hearth ashes, delivered complex flavor from simple soil. Today, we've reduced vegetables to a few predictable choices: tomatoes, potatoes, onions, over and over. But medieval plates were a riot of textures and tastes shaped by climate, culture, and necessity. Here's the emotional beat, These plants weren't just food. These plants weren't just food. They were insurance policies against famine. When one crop failed, another survived. When war disrupted trade, gardens still fed families. Diversity was security, and security meant life. So what happened? Industrial agriculture selected crops that ship well, look identical, and mature at the same time. Anything irregular, slow-growing, or unfamiliar was pushed aside. We optimized for profit, not resilience. But climate change is rewriting the rules. Soil is degrading. Weather is unpredictable. And suddenly, those tough, adaptable medieval vegetables don't look outdated. They look visionary. Imagine replanting skirret in community gardens, bringing back sea kale to coastal farms, letting good King Henry grow in backyard corners instead of spraying it away. This isn't nostalgia, it's strategy. The biggest twist: these vegetables aren't extinct. Many still grow quietly in seed banks, heritage farms, and forgotten hedgerows, waiting for us to remember them. And here's the powerful reveal. The future of food might not lie in high-tech labs or genetically edited mega crops. It might lie in the past, in the muddy boots of medieval farmers who understood one simple truth: grow many things, and you will survive. So next time you walk through a supermarket aisle, ask yourself, how many options are you really being given? And what flavors, nutrients, and survival skills have we traded away for convenience? Because bringing these vegetables back isn't just about taste, it's about reclaiming resilience. And the moment we start planting them again, we're not just reviving forgotten crops, we're rebuilding food freedom from the ground up. What if I told you the biggest lie we've been sold about food is that progress always tastes better? Stay with me, because the next forgotten vegetables medieval farmers grew might completely change how you see your plate. We left off with resilience, the secret weapon of medieval gardens. But now let's go deeper, because some of these plants weren't just tough, they were revolutionary. Take turnip-rooted chervil. Delicate leaves above ground, sweet chestnut-flavored roots below. It thrived in cold soil when other crops failed. Medieval households relied on it during the harshest months. Today, almost erased. Why would we abandon a crop designed for winter survival? Then there's bladder campion, once tossed into pies and pottages, with a mild, pea-like taste. Now most people step over it without knowing it's edible. How many edible plants are hiding in plain sight while we import bland produce from thousands of miles away? And here's another shock. Medieval farmers didn't separate beauty from utility. They grew purple carrots, striped beets, golden parsnips. Color meant nutrition. Diversity meant strength. Modern farming bleached that rainbow into uniform orange and red. But what did we lose in that simplification? Flavor, micronutrients, genetic backup. Now imagine walking into a monastery garden in the 1300s. You'd see lovage towering like wild celery, giving broths a deep, savory kick, long before bouillon cubes existed. You'd smell cosmary, called Bible leaf, used in both cooking and medicine. These weren't luxury ingredients. They were everyday survival tools. And survival meant knowing your land intimately. Here's the twist. Many forgotten vegetables actually improve soil health. CP fixes nitrogen. Groundnut enriches earth while feeding families. Medieval farming wasn't perfect, but it was cyclical. Waste returned to soil. Diversity prevented collapse. Compare that to monoculture fields stretching for miles today. If one disease hits, everything falls. Medieval farmers feared famine, so they planted insurance. Now ask yourself, are we prepared the same way? Or have we built a food system that looks strong but cracks under pressure? Let's talk about another hidden gem, orach. Before spinach dominated salads, or filled bowls with salty, mineral-rich leaves in shades of red and green, It grows in poor soil. It tolerates heat. It asks for almost nothing. Why isn't that everywhere in a warming world? And then there's perennial leek, coming back year after year without replanting. Medieval farmers loved crops that returned on their own. Less labor, more reliability. Today, we replant annuals endlessly while ignoring perennials that quietly save time and energy. Doesn't that seem backwards? Here's the emotional beat. These vegetables carried stories. Families passed down seeds like heirlooms. Wars came and went, but seeds survived in pockets and clay jars. When markets failed, gardens didn't. That quiet independence is powerful. And maybe that's what we're really missing. Not just flavors, but control. Control over what feeds us. Another forgotten warrior. Horseradish's wild cousins, sharper and more complex than anything in a plastic jar. They cleared sinuses and preserved meats naturally. Or burdock root, earthy and rich, still used in parts of Asia, but once common in Europe too. It purifies soil, it nourishes bodies, yet nourishes bodies. Yet it's labeled invasive in some places. Funny how context changes value. And here's something even more surprising. Many medieval vegetables required patience. They weren't instant, they demanded care, seasonal rhythm, understanding of frost and rain. That patience built knowledge. Today, we want everything fast. But fast food systems often mean fragile systems. So here's the powerful realization, building up. Maybe forgotten vegetables disappeared not because they were inferior, but because they didn't fit a world obsessed with speed, uniformity, and profit margins. Medieval farmers optimized for survival. We optimized for scale. And now, as climate shifts and supply chains wobble, survival is starting to matter again. Imagine community gardens filled with scarlet, borage, sea kale, good King Henry. Imagine kids tasting flavors that nearly vanished. Imagine farmers growing crops that don't beg for chemicals. This isn't fantasy. Seeds still exist. Knowledge still survives in heritage growers and seed savers. The door isn't closed. It's just waiting to be opened. And here's the final payoff. The future of food security may not depend on inventing something new, but on remembering something old. Forgotten vegetables are like buried tools. They helped humanity survive before industrial agriculture. They can help us adapt again. So the next time someone says medieval life was primitive, remember this. Those farmers understood resilience in a way we're only beginning to rediscover. And if we're smart, we won't just admire their wisdom. We'll plant it. Before you scroll, imagine a future food shortage where supermarket shelves are empty in 3 days. No imports, no trucks, no backup. Now ask yourself, what would medieval farmers do? Because the final forgotten vegetables we're uncovering today might be the difference between panic and preparation. We've talked about resilience. We've talked about diversity. But now comes the deeper truth. Medieval gardens were designed for uncertainty. They expected things to go wrong, and they planted accordingly. Take sea arrowgrass, a salty coastal plant once eaten in small amounts for its mineral-rich bite. It thrived where almost nothing else would grow. Harsh winds, poor soil, still alive. Today we ignore coastal edibles while worrying about rising sea levels. Isn't that ironic? Then there's patience, Doc. A wild relative of sorrel, tangy and packed with nutrients, growing freely without permission. Medieval people didn't wait for perfect farmland. They used margins, edges, hedgerows. They saw food where we see weeds. And here's the twist that changes everything. Many of these forgotten vegetables grow in places modern crops fail. Sandy soil, rocky ground, flood-prone land. That means bringing them back isn't just romantic nostalgia. It's strategic adaptation. Think about hogweed's young shoots once harvested carefully and cooked like asparagus, or silverweed with starchy roots dug from damp meadows. These weren't exotic delicacies, they were backup plans. Medieval farmers understood redundancy. If cabbage failed, turnips thrived. If grain struggled, roots carried on underground. Underground crops were their insurance vault. And here's something we rarely talk about. Roots store calories safely beneath frost and even conflict. Armies could burn fields, but they couldn't easily steal what was hidden below soil. That's survival intelligence. Now consider perennial crops again. Caucasian spinach, a climbing perennial green, produced leaves year after year with almost no effort. Why did we replace low-maintenance food with high-input monocultures? Because industry favors control. Medieval farmers favored continuity. Here's the emotional shift. These vegetables tell a story about humility. Medieval growers didn't assume dominance over nature. They cooperated with it. They planted varieties suited to microclimates. They saved seeds from the strongest plants. They adapted slowly. And slow adaptation builds deep resilience. Modern agriculture often overrides ecosystems. It forces uniform crops into resistant landscapes. And when something goes wrong, the failure is massive. Medieval failure was smaller, contained, diversified. That's a powerful difference. Let's talk about one more forgotten hero, parsnip varieties that were once purple, sweetened by frost, left in the ground through winter to naturally convert starch into sugar. Nature itself improved the flavor. No factories required. Or heritage turnips, some leafy and spicy, some round and mild, each suited to different soils. Today we know maybe 2 or 3 types. Back then, dozens existed locally. Diversity was hyperlocal, almost customized to each village. And here's the big realization building quietly in the background. The loss of these vegetables isn't just culinary. It's genetic. It's genetic. Every forgotten crop means fewer traits available for breeding climate-resistant food. Drought tolerance, pest resistance, salt tolerance. These traits were selected over centuries without labs, simply through observation and necessity. That knowledge is priceless. And here comes the final twist. Medieval farmers didn't see vegetables as side dishes. They were central. Meat was occasional. Roots, greens, and legumes carried daily nutrition, which means reviving forgotten vegetables doesn't just add variety. It shifts balance towards sustainability. Lower resource use, higher resilience, stronger soils. So what's stopping us? Not availability. Seeds still survive in heritage collections, not knowledge. Historians and growers are rediscovering cultivation methods. The real barrier is awareness. We forgot they matter. And that's why this matters. Because once you see what was lost, supermarket aisles start to feel narrow, predictable, fragile. Medieval gardens, by contrast, feel chaotic but alive. And alive systems bend without breaking. So here's the powerful payoff. The next agricultural revolution might not look futuristic. It might look ancient, small mixed plots, perennials returning every spring, roots hidden beneath frost, leaves thriving in neglected corners, a food system built not for speed but for survival. If medieval farmers could feed communities through plagues, wars, and brutal winters using these crops, imagine what we could do with modern knowledge layered on top of that ancient wisdom. The past isn't primitive, it's proven. And maybe the real question isn't why these vegetables disappeared, but whether we're brave enough to bring them back before we truly need them.